Hello and welcome to the BA Knowledge Share. In this episode, we cover the second task of the strategy analysis chapter within the BABOK guide. So in this task, it basically goes through defining future state. So without further ado, let's get started. So let's look at the purpose behind defining future state. The purpose of defining future state is to determine the set of necessary conditions to meet the business need. In the earlier episode, we spoke about the business need being more so as an example. Amanda is a business analyst, and she's looking to gather an understanding of current state of what the pizza place is doing in terms of brick and mortar, and more so trying to understand, hey, what are the drivers that are making them move to this online store. So that was kind of the thought. But over here, defining future state is more so understanding. Okay, now we've established analysis of current state. Let's understand uh, what's needed. What is the set of necessary conditions needed to meet the business need? So the description of this is all purposeful change must include a definition of success. Business analysts work to ensure that the future state of the enterprise is well defined, that it is achievable with the resources available, and that the key stakeholders have a shared consensus vision of the outcome. As with current state analysis, the purpose of future state analysis is not to create a comprehensive description of the outcome at a level of detail that will directly support implementation. The future state will be defined at a level of detail that allows for competing strategies to achieve the future state to be identified and assessed, provides a clear definition of the outcomes that will satisfy the business needs, details the scope of the solution space, allows for value associated with the future state to be assessed, and enables consensus to be achieved among key stakeholders. Some of the elements here are the business goals and objectives. A future state can be described in terms of business objectives or goals in order to guide the development of the change strategy and identify potential value. Business goals and objectives describe the ends that the organization is seeking to achieve. Goals and objectives can relate to changes that the organization wants to accomplish or current conditions that it wants to maintain. Goals are longer term, ongoing, and qualitative statements of a state or condition that the organization is seeking to establish and maintain. Examples of the business goals are create a new capability such as a new product or service, address a competitive disadvantage or create a new competitive advantage, improve revenue by increasing sales or reducing cost, increase customer satisfaction, increase employee satisfaction, comply with new regulations, improve safety, reduce time to deliver a product or a service. A common test for assessing objectives is to ensure that they are SMART. So you want SMART to be specific, describing something that has an observable outcome, measurable, tracking and measuring the outcome, achievable, testing the feasibility of the effort, relevant, aligning with the enterprise's vision, mission, and goals, and time-bounded, defining a time frame that is consistent with the need. The scope of solutions-based decisions is a second element. Decisions must be made about the range of solutions that will be considered to meet the business goals and objectives. The scope of the solution space defines which kinds of options will be considered when investigating possible solutions, including changes to the organizational structure or culture, capabilities and processes, technology and infrastructure, policies, products or services, or even creating or changing relationships with organizations currently outside the scope of extended enterprise. Solutions in each of these areas generally require specific expertise from both the business analysis and delivery team. The analysis for this might happen on different levels in the enterprise, and the scope of the solution space is not necessarily related to the size of the change. Even a small change might require looking at the enterprise level business objectives to ensure alignment. Constraints. Constraints describe aspects of the current state, aspects of the planned future state that may be changed by the solution or mandatory elements of the design. They must be carefully examined to ensure that they are accurate and justified. Constraints may reflect any of the following. You could have budgetary constraints or restrictions, time restrictions, technology, infrastructure, policies, limits on the number of resources available, restrictions based on the skills of team and stakeholders, the requirement that certain stakeholders not be affected by the implementation of the solution, compliance with regulations, and any other restrictions. The fourth element here is organizational structure and culture. Formal and informal working relationships that exist within the enterprise may need to change to facilitate the desired future state. Capabilities and processes. These identify new kinds of activities or changes in the way activities will be performed to realize a future state. Technology and infrastructure is the sixth element. If current technology and infrastructure are insufficient to meet the business need, the business analyst identifies the changes necessary for the desired future state. Policies is the seventh element. If current policies are insufficient to meet the business need, the business analyst identifies the changes necessary for the desired future state. Eighth is business architecture. The elements of any future state must effectively support one another and all contribute to the meeting the business goals and objectives. You could have internal assets. The analysis of resources might indicate that existing resources need to be increased or require increased capabilities, or that new resources need to be developed. When analyzing resources, business analysts examine the resources needed to maintain the current state and implement the change strategy, and determine what resources can be used as part of a desired future state. Identify assumptions. Most strategies are predicated on a set of assumptions that will determine whether or not the strategy can succeed, particularly when operating in a highly uncertain environment. Potential value meeting the business objectives alone does not justify the transition to a future state. The potential value must be evaluated to see if it is sufficient to justify a change. So there are 11 elements within this task, and then you have guidelines and tools. So what are some of the tools that you can use in this basic task? So the one is current state description, provides the context within which the work needs to be completed. Metrics and key performance indicators provide which metrics and KPIs will be used to determine whether the desired future state has been achieved. Organizational strategy describes the path, the method, or the approach an enterprise or organization will take to achieve its desired future state. I'm not going to go through each and every technique, but there's numerous techniques here. Some of them are the acceptance and evaluation criteria, a balanced scorecard. It is used to set targets for measuring the future state, benchmarking and market analysis, brainstorming, business capability analysis, and so on and so forth. Some of the stakeholders are your customer, your domain subject matter expert, your end user, your implementation subject matter expert, your operational support, your project manager, regulator, sponsor, supplier, and tester. So basically, all sorts of stakeholders are involved over here. So let's look at this from Amanda's perspective. As I mentioned earlier, she is a business analyst that's been hired on this project to move pizza, brick and mortar company to an online digital store. So that being said, in this case, she's already done her current state analysis that's given. She uses the business need to define the future state. And in this case, she looks at things like, well, what does the future state look like? And she considers competing strategies. She looks at defining a clear strategy of the outcomes that will satisfy the business needs. She details the scope of the solution space. She allows for value associated with the future state to be assessed and enables consensus to be achieved amongst key stakeholders. She considers the business goals and objectives while crafting the future state. She also considers things like, well, what does this do? Like, what are the business goals here? Or what could the business goals be here? Is it to create a new capability? Is it to improve revenue? Is it to increase customer satisfaction? But in this case, it's primarily to increase revenue. There's other goals that are an offshoot of that, and that it is to also increase customer satisfaction. And she would employ some smart goals, right? So she would make sure that those goals are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time bounded. She also considers the scope of the solution that needs to be solved for. She considers constraints that they need to look at. So, are there any sort of budgetary constraints? Like, how much money does the company have in order to support the change that's needed? She looks at things like capabilities and processes, existing technology and infrastructure. Are there any policies that they need to follow, specific to business policies? Um, are there any sort of elements of any future state that must effectively support one another? So she looks at it more from a holistic perspective, like are there pieces that she needs to consider when crafting the future state? Looks at internal assets. She identifies assumptions. Are there any sort of risks involved? Are there any unknowns that they need to look at? She looks at the potential value. Like, what does this do for the business in terms of their metrics? She looks at guidelines and tools in form of current state description. She looks at metrics and KPIs to determine whether the desired future state has been achieved. She looks at the organizational strategy. She uses various techniques. She uses business capability analysis, business model canvas, and she has a whole toolbox of tools that she can leverage. In this case, she looks to various stakeholders, customers, domain subject matter experts, end users, operational support, project manager, regulator, sponsor, supplier, tester. So the perspective here is more so in terms of Amanda's involved in more so like an upfront analysis of what the strategic future state should look like. So it's very different from an IT sort of business analyst in the day-to-day, doing the day-to-day implementation, or being part of that day-to-day analysis. It all depends upon the horizon, which horizon is this BA in. In this case, it's very strategic. So that kind of ends this task. If you do find value in these videos, please do consider subscribing. Also, we do have a website, beaknowledgeshare.com. Please do consider subscribing to that website as well to receive articles that may not be part of the YouTube channel. We do send out monthly newsletters, so just for you guys to stay up to date. That being said, until next time, see you guys then.